The summer of 2001 felt different in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The heat pressed down on the small suburban town like a heavy blanket, and even the usually cheerful chatter of children playing in their yards seemed muted. 8-year-old Tommy Brennan and his best friend, 9-year-old Marcus Powell, had been looking forward to their sleepover at the Brennan house for weeks. Their mothers, Linda Brennan and Angela Powell, had been friends since college, and their boys had grown up together like brothers. On that humid Friday evening of July 13th, the two families gathered for what should have been an ordinary sleepover. The boys had spent the afternoon building a fort in Tommy's backyard, using old cardboard boxes and beach towels. Their laughter echoed through the neighborhood as they planned their night of video games, pizza, and staying up past their bedtime. If you're finding this story as compelling as we are, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. Linda Brennan remembered tucking both boys into sleeping bags on Tommy's bedroom floor around 10 o'clock that night. She had checked on them twice, once at 11:30 when she heard giggling, and again at midnight when she went to bed herself. Both times, the boys were safe in their makeshift campsite, whispering about their plans for Saturday morning. Tommy's father, David Brennan, had worked late that evening at his accounting firm and arrived home around 11:15, briefly greeting the boys before they settled down for the night. The morning of July 14th shattered the Powell and Brennan families forever. Linda woke at 7:30 to prepare breakfast for the boys, expecting to find them still asleep, or perhaps quietly playing with Tommy's action figures. Instead, she discovered 2 empty sleeping bags and an open bedroom window. The screen had been carefully removed from the outside and placed against the house. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of distress. The boys had simply vanished into the warm Pennsylvania morning. David Brennan called the police immediately, while Linda frantically searched every room, closet, and hiding spot in their 3-bedroom colonial home. Angela Powell arrived within minutes of Linda's panicked phone call, her face pale with terror as she helped search the yard and surrounding streets. The neighborhood quickly mobilized, with dozens of residents combing through backyards, checking garages, and calling the boys names. Detective Ray Harrison of the Millbrook Police Department arrived at 8:45 that morning and immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. A 20-year veteran with experience in missing persons cases, Harrison knew that every minute counted. He established the Brennan home as command central and began interviewing family members while patrol officers canvassed the neighborhood. The detective's methodical approach provided some comfort to the devastated parents, though his serious expression revealed his concern about the circumstances. The initial investigation revealed several puzzling elements. The bedroom window was 12 feet above ground level, with no ladder, tree branches, or obvious means of access from outside. Yet the screen had definitely been removed from the exterior, suggesting someone had approached from that direction. Inside the room, the boys' belongings remained untouched, their clothes, toys, and even Tommy's favorite stuffed elephant that he never slept without. Most mysteriously, both boys' shoes were missing, though their socks lay crumpled on the floor beside their sleeping bags. Within hours, the search expanded beyond Millbrook's borders. The Pennsylvania State Police joined the investigation, bringing additional resources and expertise. Search and rescue teams with tracking dogs arrived from neighboring counties, following scent trails that led from the bedroom window to the street and then disappeared completely. The FBI field office in Philadelphia was contacted as the case showed potential indicators of an abduction that could have crossed state lines. Detective Harrison interviewed the boys' families extensively during those first crucial days. Both sets of parents had solid alibis and no history of domestic issues. The Brennans and Powells were well respected in their community. David worked as a certified public accountant. Linda taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary. Angela managed a local bookstore, and her husband Robert worked as a mechanical engineer. Neither family had any known enemies or financial troubles that might explain the disappearance. The investigation revealed that Tommy and Marcus were typical children of their era. They played outside regularly, knew most of their neighbors, and had never shown any inclination to run away. Both boys were excellent students, well liked by classmates and teachers. They had no access to the internet unsupervised, and their television viewing was carefully monitored by their parents. The idea that they had somehow arranged to meet someone or planned their own disappearance seemed impossible to everyone who knew them. As July stretched into August, the case began to consume Detective Harrison's life. He worked 18-hour days, following up on hundreds of tips from concerned citizens. Reports of suspicious vehicles in the neighborhood were investigated thoroughly, but none yielded concrete leads. The detective coordinated with local schools to interview Tommy and Marcus's classmates, teachers, and coaches, hoping to uncover any detail that might explain their disappearance. Every person who had interacted with the boys in the weeks leading up to July 13th was questioned and their whereabouts verified. The media attention was intense, but carefully managed. Local television stations ran daily updates, while newspapers across Pennsylvania featured the boys' school photographs on front pages. The families made tearful appeals for information, begging anyone who might have seen Tommy and Marcus to come forward. Reward money grew from an initial $1,000 offered by the families to over $50,000 contributed by community members, local businesses, and anonymous donors. Despite the publicity and financial incentive, no credible witnesses emerged. The psychological toll on both families was devastating. Linda Brennan stopped teaching and spent every waking moment coordinating search efforts and following potential leads. David continued working, but seemed to age years in a matter of weeks, his hair turning grey almost overnight. Angela Powell required medical attention for severe anxiety and depression, while Robert threw himself into organizing volunteer search parties that scoured woods, abandoned buildings, and remote areas within a 50-mile radius of Millbrook. By September 2001, as the nation grappled with the tragedy of 9/11, the disappearance of Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell remained as mysterious as the day it occurred. Detective Harrison had investigated over 300 leads, interviewed more than 1,000 people, and coordinated searches covering hundreds of square miles. The FBI profile suggested the boys had likely encountered someone they trusted, given the lack of struggle and the methodical way they had apparently left the house. However, no evidence supported any theory about what had actually happened to them. The case file grew thick with reports, witness statements, and forensic analysis, but the boys themselves remained nowhere to be found. As autumn arrived in Millbrook, their families faced the heartbreaking reality that Tommy and Marcus might never come home. The investigation would continue, but with each passing day, hope grew dimmer and the mystery deepened. The 2 empty sleeping bags in Tommy's room became a shrine that Linda Brennan couldn't bear to disturb, a painful reminder of the last place she had seen her son and his best friend alive. Years passed with agonizing slowness for the families of Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell. Detective Harrison retired in 2008, passing the cold case to his younger colleague, Detective Maria Santos, who brought fresh eyes and new technology to the investigation. Santos digitized all the original files, re-interviewed key witnesses, and utilized advanced DNA analysis techniques that hadn't been available in 2001. Despite these efforts, the case remained as baffling as ever. Linda Brennan never returned to teaching. Instead, she founded a non-profit organization called Missing Children of Pennsylvania, which provided support services to other families experiencing similar tragedies. The organization grew rapidly, helping coordinate searches and providing emotional counseling to parents whose children had vanished. Linda's work gave her a sense of purpose while keeping Tommy's memory alive. though the pain of his absence never lessened. David Brennan struggled with guilt and depression for years after the disappearance. He blamed himself for working late that night, convinced that his presence might have somehow prevented the tragedy. Their marriage survived, but both Linda and David admitted in later interviews that they had become different people after July 13, 2001. They moved from the house on Maple Street in 2005, unable to bear living in the same rooms where they had last seen their son. The Powell family experienced similar devastation. Angela never fully recovered from her breakdown in the months following Marcus's disappearance. She required ongoing psychiatric care and was unable to return to her job at the bookstore. Robert Powell threw himself into his engineering work and volunteer search efforts for other missing children, traveling across the country to assist in similar cases. Their marriage ended in divorce in 2006, though both maintained that losing Marcus had simply broken something fundamental in their relationship that couldn't be repaired. Detective Santos reopened active investigation of the case in 2010, coinciding with the 9th anniversary of the boy's disappearance. She had become fascinated by certain details that previous investigators had noted but perhaps not fully explored. The removed window screen bothered her. The precision with which it had been taken out suggested someone familiar with that type of window assembly. Santos spent weeks researching contractors, maintenance workers, and delivery personnel who might have worked in the Brennan neighborhood in the months before July 2001. This line of investigation led Santos to Gerald Whitmore, a window replacement contractor who had worked extensively in Millbrook during spring 2001. Whitmore had installed new windows in 3 houses on the Brennan Street in May and June of that year, though not in the Brennan home itself. When Santos attempted to locate Whitmore for questioning, she discovered he had died in a car accident in Ohio in 2003. However, his former business partner, Carl Rodriguez, provided valuable information about Whitmore's work methods and client interactions. Rodriguez revealed that Whitmore had been known for his unusual habit of returning to job sites weeks or months after completing work, claiming he wanted to check on the quality of his installations. Several homeowners had reported seeing Whitmore in their neighborhoods long after his work was finished, though no one had considered this behavior suspicious at the time. More concerning, Rodriguez admitted that Whitmore had made inappropriate comments about children he observed while working, though Rodriguez had never witnessed any direct interaction between Whitmore and minors. This revelation prompted Santos to investigate every job Whitmore had completed in the years before his death. She discovered a disturbing pattern. 3 other communities where Whitmore had worked had experienced unsolved disappearances of children within months of his projects. While no direct evidence linked him to these cases, the correlation was too significant to ignore. Santos coordinated with police departments in Ohio, Maryland, and Virginia to share information about Whitmore's potential involvement in multiple missing children cases. The investigation into Gerald Whitmore consumed 2 years of Santos's career. She meticulously tracked his work history, travel patterns, and personal relationships. Whitmore had been a loner with no family, few friends, and a history of minor legal troubles, including trespassing and voyeurism charges, that had never resulted in serious consequences. His Ohio death had been ruled accidental, but Santos wondered if guilt or fear of exposure had played a role in the circumstances that led to his fatal car crash. Despite her suspicions about Whitmore, Santos could never establish concrete evidence connecting him to Tommy and Marcus's disappearance. His alibi, for July 13, 2001, was solid. He had been working on a job in Delaware, with multiple witnesses confirming his presence there from July 12th through July 15th. Security camera footage from a Delaware hotel confirmed Whitmore had stayed there during the critical time period, making it virtually impossible for him to have been in Millbrook when the boys vanished. The Whitmore investigation represented the most promising lead in the case since 2001, but ultimately led nowhere. Santos returned to reviewing the original evidence, hoping that advancing forensic technology might reveal new clues. She submitted carpet fibers from Tommy's room for advanced analysis, re-examined fingerprints collected from the window area, and even arranged for ground-penetrating radar searches of areas that hadn't been thoroughly investigated during the initial response. Community interest in the case was rekindled by Santos's active investigation. Local television stations ran anniversary specials featuring interviews with the families and updates on new developments. The reward money had grown to over $100,000 by 2012, funded by donations from across Pennsylvania and beyond. Despite renewed media attention and public interest, no new credible leads emerged from these efforts. By 2015, Detective Santos had exhausted virtually every investigative avenue available. She had coordinated with the FBI's cold case unit, consulted with criminal profilers, and utilized every technological tool at her disposal. The case file now filled multiple boxes, containing thousands of pages of reports, interviews, and analysis. Santos transferred to another department in 2016, but she never stopped thinking about Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell, carrying their photographs in her desk drawer as a reminder of the case that had defined much of her career. The families continued their separate journeys through grief and hope. Linda Brennan's non-profit organization had helped locate dozens of missing children over the years, though none of these successes could fill the void left by Tommy's absence. She remarried in 2018 to a widower named Frank Morrison, who understood loss and supported her continued advocacy work. David Brennan never remarried but maintained close relationships with his extended family and found solace in volunteer work with various charities. Angela Powell's mental health gradually improved with consistent treatment and the support of a dedicated psychiatrist. She eventually returned to work part-time at a different bookstore and developed a close friendship with other parents who had lost children. Robert Powell remained single, but became a nationally recognized expert in missing children cases, frequently consulting with law enforcement agencies and families across the country. Though divorced, Angela and Robert maintained a cordial relationship, united by their shared loss and hope that Marcus might someday be found. As the 20th anniversary of the disappearance approached in 2021, both families faced the reality that Tommy and Marcus, if still alive, would be grown men in their late 20s. The physical descriptions and photographs that had been circulated for decades were now essentially useless for identification purposes. Age progression images created by forensic artists provided some hope, but the passage of time had made the prospect of recognition increasingly unlikely. The COVID-19 pandemic delayed anniversary commemorations, but in July 2022, a small memorial service was held in Millbrook's town park. Linda Brennan spoke about the importance of never giving up hope, while Robert Powell addressed the ongoing need for advances in missing children investigations. Local law enforcement representatives assured the families that the case remained open and would continue to be reviewed periodically as new technologies and techniques became available. Despite the formal words of encouragement, everyone present understood that 21 years had likely diminished any realistic prospect of solving the mystery. The transformation of both families over 2 decades illustrated the long-term impact of such tragedies. What had begun as a typical suburban sleepover had evolved into a life-defining event that changed the trajectory of multiple lives. The ripple effects extended beyond immediate family members to include friends, neighbors, investigators, and community members who had been touched by the case. The mystery of July 13, 2001 had become woven into the fabric of Millbrook's history, a reminder of how quickly normalcy could be shattered and how some questions might never be answered. In early 2024, the case took an unexpected turn that would reignite hope and lead to revelations no one could have anticipated. A construction crew working on a housing development project 15 miles northeast of Millbrook made a discovery that would finally provide some answers to the 23-year-old mystery. The Willowbrook Estates development was being built on land that had remained undeveloped since the 1990s. The property consisted of dense woods and overgrown fields that had once been part of a larger farm. As construction workers used heavy machinery to clear trees and level the ground for foundation work, they uncovered what appeared to be the remains of an old structure buried beneath decades of leaf litter and forest growth. Excavation revealed the foundation of what had once been a small cabin or hunting lodge, built sometime in the 1980s, according to concrete stamps found at the site. The structure had apparently been abandoned and allowed to decay naturally, with weather and vegetation gradually reclaiming the area. However, among the debris and rotted wood, workers discovered something that would bring Detective Santos out of her current assignment and back to the case that had haunted her career. 2 small pairs of socks, remarkably preserved by the dry conditions within what remained of the cabin's foundation, were found buried beneath fallen timber and accumulated debris. The socks were children's size, one pair featuring a cartoon character pattern that parents and investigators would later identify from photographs as belonging to Marcus Powell. The second pair was solid blue, matching the description Linda Brennan had provided of the socks Tommy had worn to bed on July 13, 2001. The discovery prompted an immediate response from multiple law enforcement agencies. Detective Santos, now working in the State Police Cold Case Unit, coordinated a comprehensive excavation of the entire site. Forensic archaeologists were brought in to ensure that every piece of potential evidence was carefully documented and preserved. The work proceeded slowly and methodically, with each layer of debris and soil being photographed, measured, and analyzed. DNA analysis of the socks confirmed what investigators and families had suspected. Genetic material matching both Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell was present on the respective pairs. This represented the first physical evidence of the boys' whereabouts since their disappearance, though it raised more questions than it answered. How had they come to this remote location? What had happened to them after they arrived? And most importantly, where were they now? Further excavation of the site revealed additional evidence that painted a disturbing picture of what might have occurred in 2001. Investigators found remnants of children's clothing that appeared to match items the boys had been wearing when they disappeared. More significantly, they discovered what appeared to be a makeshift sleeping area within the cabin ruins, complete with rotted blankets and the remains of food containers that could be dated to approximately the right time period based on packaging and expiration dates. The discovery suggested that Tommy and Marcus had been held at this location, at least temporarily, after their disappearance from the Brennan home. However, the absence of human remains at the site indicated that whatever had ultimately happened to the boys had occurred elsewhere. This revelation was both encouraging and terrifying for the families. Encouraging because it suggested the boys had survived at least initially, but terrifying because it confirmed they had indeed been abducted and held against their will. Detective Santos launched the most intensive phase of investigation the case had seen since the original response in 2001. She assembled a team of specialists including forensic anthropologists, criminal profilers, and technology experts to analyze every piece of evidence from the Willowbrook site. Property records were researched to determine who had owned the land in 2001 and who might have had access to the remote cabin location. The property had been owned by Harold Fitzgerald, an elderly farmer who had died in 2003. Fitzgerald's family had attempted to sell the land multiple times over the years, but its remote location and the cost of clearing the overgrown areas had made it unattractive to potential buyers until the recent development project. Fitzgerald had lived alone and had a reputation as a recluse, though neighbors described him as harmless and eccentric rather than threatening. Investigation into Fitzgerald's background revealed no history of criminal activity or inappropriate behavior toward children. However, Santos discovered that Fitzgerald had employed various workers over the years to maintain his property and assist with farming operations. Most of these workers had been seasonal employees who moved from job to job throughout Pennsylvania and surrounding states. Tracking down these individuals more than 20 years later proved challenging, as many had died, moved away, or simply disappeared into the transient agricultural workforce. One name that emerged from Fitzgerald's employment records was particularly interesting to Santos: Michael Torres, a man who had worked for Fitzgerald during summer 2001 and had left his employment abruptly in mid-July, just days after Tommy and Marcus disappeared. Torres had provided false references when applying for the job, and attempts to verify his background had revealed discrepancies in his stated work history and personal information. The search for Michael Torres became Santos's top priority. She discovered that Torres had used multiple aliases over the years and had a criminal history in several states, including convictions for burglary, fraud, and child endangerment. Most significantly, Torres had disappeared from his last known address in West Virginia in 2019, leaving behind unpaid debts and no forwarding information. His current whereabouts were unknown, and he appeared to have successfully evaded law enforcement efforts to locate him in connection with various outstanding warrants. Santos coordinated with FBI resources to conduct a nationwide search for Torres, utilizing facial recognition technology, financial records analysis, and interagency databases. The search revealed that Torres had likely been living under assumed identities for years, possibly decades. Bank records and employment history showed a pattern of short-term jobs followed by sudden departures, often coinciding with local reports of suspicious activity or minor crimes. The investigation into Torres revealed disturbing parallels to other unsolved cases across multiple states. Law enforcement agencies in Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee reported similar patterns of missing children in areas where Torres had lived or worked. While no definitive connections could be established, the correlations were significant enough to warrant further investigation and coordination between agencies. Meanwhile, the families of Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell struggled to process the implications of the Willowbrook discovery. After 23 years of uncertainty, they finally had confirmation that their boys had been abducted and held captive, at least temporarily. The discovery of the socks provided a tangible connection to their children that had been missing for more than 2 decades, but it also forced them to confront the likelihood that Tommy and Marcus had experienced trauma and possibly death. Linda Brennan's reaction to the news was complex. While grateful for any information about Tommy's fate, she struggled with the implications of what the evidence revealed. Her non-profit organization had taught her about the realities of child abduction cases, and she understood that the discovery of the boys' belongings without their physical presence suggested a tragic outcome. However, she refused to abandon hope entirely, clinging to the possibility that Tommy and Marcus had somehow survived and might still be found. David Brennan found himself reliving the trauma of 2001 as investigators once again focused intensive attention on his son's disappearance. The discovery at Willowbrook brought back all the emotions he thought he had learned to manage over the years. He took a leave of absence from his current job to fully engage with the investigation, determined to assist law enforcement in any way possible while preparing himself mentally for whatever discoveries might come. Angela Powell's response to the news was initially one of relief. After years of not knowing anything about Marcus's fate, having concrete evidence of his presence at a specific location felt like progress, even though the implications were disturbing. Her psychiatrist helped her process the mixed emotions of hope and dread that accompanied the revelation, while her support network rallied to provide emotional assistance during this difficult time. Robert Powell threw himself into the investigation with characteristic intensity. He had maintained detailed files on the case throughout the years and immediately began cross-referencing the new information with his research. His expertise in missing children cases proved valuable to Santos's team, and he became an unofficial consultant on the investigation while maintaining his role as an advocate for the families. The Willowbrook discovery marked a turning point in the case, transforming it from a cold case into an active investigation with concrete leads and evidence. For the first time in 23 years, law enforcement had a viable suspect in Michael Torres and a clear direction for their efforts. However, questions remained about Torres's current location and whether he was still alive. The clock was ticking on the possibility of bringing him to justice and potentially discovering what had ultimately happened to Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell. The search for Michael Torres intensified throughout 2024, utilizing every available resource and technology. Detective Santos coordinated with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to develop a comprehensive profile of Torres based on his known history and the evidence from Willowbrook. The profile painted a picture of a transient predator who targeted isolated rural communities where he could operate without scrutiny and disappear quickly when necessary. Advanced forensic analysis of the Willowbrook site revealed additional crucial evidence. Investigators discovered hair fibers that contained DNA matching Torres's profile from previous arrests. More significantly, they found traces of a specific type of rope that had been used to restrain the boys, evidenced by marks on trees within the cabin ruins and fiber residue on the discovered clothing items. This rope was later identified as a specialized agricultural product manufactured by only 3 companies in North America, providing another avenue for tracing Torres's movements and activities. The breakthrough in the case came in November 2024, when facial recognition software matched Torres to security camera footage from a truck stop in Arizona. The images, captured just 3 weeks prior, showed a man matching Torres's physical description purchasing fuel and supplies. FBI agents responded immediately to the location, but Torres had already departed. However, the truck stop employees provided valuable information about his vehicle. A modified van with Pennsylvania license plates that had been reported stolen from a Philadelphia suburb earlier that year. This sighting triggered a multi-state manhunt coordinated by federal authorities. Torres's photograph and vehicle description were distributed to law enforcement agencies across the southwestern United States, while media outlets broadcast the information to the public. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with dozens of reported sightings flooding tip lines within hours of the initial broadcast. 2 days after the Arizona sighting, Torres was spotted at a remote camping area in New Mexico by hikers who recognized him from television reports. Local sheriff's deputies surrounded the area while federal agents were en route, but Torres managed to flee on foot into the desert wilderness. The abandoned van yielded a treasure trove of evidence, including personal belongings that had belonged to Tommy and Marcus, documents dating back to 2001, and detailed journals that would later prove instrumental in understanding the full scope of Torres's crimes. The journals, written in Torres's distinctive handwriting, contained detailed accounts of his abduction and captivity of multiple children over a 20-year period. The entries were meticulously organized by date and location, revealing a pattern of predatory behavior that spanned numerous states and dozens of victims. Most horrifyingly, the journals included specific references to Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell, describing their abduction from the Millbrook home and their subsequent captivity at the Willowbrook site. According to Torres's own writings, he had been working for Harold Fitzgerald when he observed the Brennan household during his commute to and from the farm. He had specifically noted the presence of children and had conducted surveillance of the family's routines over several weeks before the sleepover provided what he saw as an ideal opportunity. The journal entries described his method of accessing the house through the bedroom window and his success in convincing the boys to come with him quietly by claiming their parents had sent him to retrieve them for an early morning adventure. The journals revealed that Tommy and Marcus had been held at the Willowbrook cabin for approximately 2 weeks during July 2001. Torres had apparently told them that their parents were involved in some kind of legal trouble and that he was protecting them until the situation was resolved. The boys had initially believed this story, though they became increasingly suspicious and distressed as time passed without any contact with their families. Most significantly, the journals indicated that both boys had survived their initial captivity and had been transported to another location when Torres became concerned about increased law enforcement activity in the Millbrook area. He had written about moving them to what he described as a more permanent arrangement in another state, though the specific location was referenced only through coded abbreviations that investigators were still working to decipher. The desert manhunt for Torres continued for 6 days, involving hundreds of law enforcement personnel, tracking dogs, helicopters, and thermal imaging equipment. The harsh New Mexico terrain provided numerous hiding places, while extreme weather conditions complicated search efforts. Torres had apparently prepared for the possibility of extended survival in wilderness conditions, as evidenced by survival gear and supplies found in his abandoned van. On the 6th day of the search, Border Patrol agents spotted Torres attempting to cross into Mexico through a remote section of the border fence. He was apprehended without incident, appearing dehydrated and exhausted from his time in the desert. Torres initially refused to speak to investigators, invoking his right to legal representation and maintaining complete silence about his activities and the whereabouts of his victims. The arrest of Michael Torres was front-page news across the country, with particular focus on the Pennsylvania communities affected by his crimes. For the families of Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell, Torres's capture represented both vindication and renewed hope. After 23 years of uncertainty, they finally had someone in custody who could provide answers about what had happened to their boys. Detective Santos traveled to New Mexico to participate in Torres's interrogation, bringing with her detailed knowledge of the original investigation and the evidence discovered at Willowbrook. However, Torres proved to be an uncooperative subject who seemed to derive satisfaction from withholding information that could help locate his victims. His court-appointed attorney advised continued silence, recognizing that any statements Torres made could potentially result in additional charges or death penalty consideration. The investigation team decided to focus on decoding Torres's journals and utilizing other evidence to determine the locations where Tommy and Marcus might have been taken after leaving the Willowbrook site. Geographic analysis of Torres's known movements and employment history during 2001 and 2002 suggested several possible destinations, including rural areas in Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, where he had maintained temporary residences or work arrangements. Simultaneous investigations were launched in each of these potential locations, with local law enforcement agencies providing assistance in searching properties associated with Torres's historical presence. The effort was massive in scope, involving ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and comprehensive interviews with anyone who might have encountered Torres during the relevant time periods. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a former co-worker of Torres who contacted authorities after seeing his arrest on television. James Holloway had worked with Torres at a Christmas tree farm in eastern Kentucky during winter 2001, and he remembered Torres arriving at the job site with two young boys who Torres claimed were his nephews visiting for the holidays. Holloway had found the situation unusual because the boys seemed sad and withdrawn, and Torres had been very protective of them, not allowing them to interact with other workers or venture far from his site. Holloway's information led investigators to the Piney Ridge Christmas Tree Farm, a family-owned operation that had employed seasonal workers for decades. The farm owners, elderly siblings named Walter and Emma Crenshaw, remembered Torres and confirmed Holloway's account of his brief employment there. More importantly, they recalled that Torres had lived in a small trailer on the property during his time there, accompanied by two children who rarely spoke and seemed afraid of strangers. The trailer had been removed from the property years earlier, but the Crenshaw siblings were able to provide its exact former location. Initial examination of the site revealed evidence of long-term habitation, including buried garbage containing items that could be dated to the winter of 2001-2002. Among these items were children's clothing, in sizes that would have fit Tommy and Marcus at ages 8 and 9, as well as school supplies and toys that matched descriptions provided by their families. Further excavation of the trailer site yielded more promising discoveries. Investigators found a child's drawing buried beneath the former trailer foundation, depicting two stick figures standing beside a house with the words "Tommy and Marcus" written in childish handwriting at the bottom. The drawing was remarkably well preserved due to being wrapped in plastic, and handwriting analysis later confirmed it had been created by one of the missing boys. The discovery at Piney Ridge represented the most significant development in the case since Torres's arrest. It confirmed that both boys had survived their initial abduction and had been alive at least 6 months after their disappearance from Millbrook. However, the trail went cold again after the Christmas Tree Farm, as Torres's movements became more difficult to track following his departure from Kentucky in spring 2002. Renewed pressure was applied to Torres to cooperate with the investigation, including offers of plea agreements that would spare him from death penalty consideration in exchange for information about his victims' locations. His attorney indicated that Torres was considering these offers, but needed time to review the evidence and discuss options with his client. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of his journals continued, with code experts and linguists working to decipher the abbreviations and references that might lead to other locations where victims had been taken. The families waited anxiously for any news that might finally reveal what had happened to Tommy and Marcus after their time in Kentucky. The discovery of the drawing had provided hope that the boys might have survived longer than initially feared, but it also raised questions about their ultimate fate and current whereabouts. As 2024 drew to a close, the case remained active and investigation continued. But the families understood that they might never get the complete answers they sought, even with Torres in custody. The investigation's revelations had already provided more information about Tommy and Marcus's fate than anyone had expected to uncover after 23 years. While many questions remained unanswered, the families finally had confirmation of what had happened to their boys and who was responsible. The discovery of the socks at Willowbrook had led to the most significant developments in the case's history, proving that even decades-old evidence could still yield crucial clues when examined with modern technology and persistent investigative work. In January 2025, Michael Torres's resistance finally cracked under the weight of overwhelming evidence and the prospect of facing multiple death penalty charges across several states. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement that would result in life imprisonment without parole in exchange for Torres providing complete information about the locations of his victims and full cooperation with ongoing investigations. The debriefing sessions with Torres began immediately, conducted by a team of federal agents, local detectives, including Santos, and psychological specialists trained in interviewing serial offenders. Torres revealed a horrifying timeline of criminal activity spanning more than 20 years, involving dozens of victims across multiple states. His methodical approach to documenting his crimes in the journals had created a roadmap that investigators could follow to locate evidence and, hopefully, survivors. Regarding Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell specifically, Torres confirmed that both boys had been alive when he transported them from the Millbrook site to the Kentucky Christmas tree farm. He described how he had maintained control over them through a combination of threats, false promises about reuniting them with their families, and psychological manipulation designed to make them dependent on him for survival. The boys had been told their families believed they were dead and had stopped looking for them, a lie that Torres used to discourage escape attempts. Torres revealed that after leaving Kentucky in spring 2002, he had taken the boys to a remote compound in rural Tennessee, where he had connections with a group involved in various illegal activities, including drug trafficking and human smuggling. This group, according to Torres, had experience in hiding people and making them disappear permanently from official records. He claimed that Tommy and Marcus had been turned over to this organization, which had then relocated them to locations unknown even to Torres himself. The Tennessee compound information led to an immediate multi-agency operation involving federal authorities, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and local law enforcement. The remote location, situated in the Cumberland Mountains, had been abandoned for several years when investigators arrived, but evidence of long-term criminal activity was immediately apparent. Buildings on the property showed signs of having housed multiple people against their will, with reinforced doors, barred windows, and improvised sleeping areas. Forensic teams spent weeks processing the Tennessee site, uncovering evidence that supported Torres's claims about the compound's activities. They found documentation suggesting that the organization had indeed been involved in human trafficking, with records indicating movement of numerous individuals, including children, to various locations across the southeastern United States and possibly internationally. Most significantly for the Brennan and Powell families, investigators discovered items that had belonged to Tommy and Marcus among personal effects stored in one of the compound buildings. These included a small toy car that Linda Brennan immediately recognized as Tommy's favorite, and a baseball card collection that Angela Powell confirmed had belonged to Marcus. The presence of these items at the Tennessee location corroborated Torres's account of the boys being brought there in 2002. However, the trail went cold again at the Tennessee compound. The criminal organization Torres had described had apparently dissolved years earlier, with its members either deceased, imprisoned on unrelated charges, or scattered to unknown locations. The few individuals investigators were able to locate and interview claimed no knowledge of specific victims or their ultimate destinations, maintaining that their involvement had been limited to logistics and transportation rather than direct handling of trafficked persons. Torres provided additional details about the organization's methods and contacts, leading to investigations in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, where he believed victims might have been relocated. However, his information became increasingly vague when it came to specific locations or the ultimate fate of individual victims. He maintained that the organization had deliberately kept individual members uninformed about final destinations as a security measure, making it impossible for him to provide the precise answers that families desperately sought. The psychological evaluation of Torres revealed a complex individual who exhibited characteristics of both antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. Dr. Elizabeth Hammond, the forensic psychiatrist who conducted extensive interviews with Torres, concluded that his cooperation was motivated primarily by a desire to maintain some control over the investigation and attention rather than genuine remorse for his victims. She warned investigators that Torres might be withholding information or providing false details to extend his importance to the ongoing cases. Despite these concerns about Torres's reliability, his cooperation had already led to significant developments in multiple missing persons cases beyond Tommy and Marcus. Investigations were launched in 7 states based on information from his journals, resulting in the discovery of evidence related to at least 12 other missing children cases dating back to the 1990s. While most of these cases appeared to have tragic outcomes, the information provided some closure to families who had been waiting for answers for decades. For the Brennan and Powell families, Torres's revelations were both enlightening and devastating. The confirmation that their boys had survived for at least 8 months after their abduction provided some comfort, but the likelihood that they had been handed over to human traffickers created new fears about what they might have endured. The families struggled with the knowledge that Tommy and Marcus could potentially still be alive somewhere, living under assumed identities and possibly unaware of their true histories. Linda Brennan made the difficult decision to undergo hypnotic regression therapy to recover any suppressed memories that might provide additional clues about Tommy's disappearance. During these sessions, she recalled previously forgotten details about the weeks leading up to July 13, 2001, including observations about unfamiliar vehicles in the neighborhood and instances when she had felt watched while doing yard work. While these memories couldn't be independently verified, they supported Torres's claims about conducting surveillance before the abduction. David Brennan focused his efforts on working with federal authorities to trace the financial and logistical networks that Torres claimed had been involved in trafficking victims. His accounting background proved valuable in analyzing the limited financial records recovered from the Tennessee compound, helping investigators identify patterns and connections that might lead to other locations or individuals involved in the operation. Angela Powell pursued a different approach, working with age progression specialists to create updated images of what Marcus might look like as an adult. These images were distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country and posted on missing persons websites, on the theory that Marcus might eventually see his own image and recognize it, or that someone who knew him under another identity might make the connection. Robert Powell continued his work as a missing children advocate, while also assisting with the investigation into the trafficking network. His experience with similar cases provided valuable perspective on the methods used by such organizations and the challenges involved in locating victims who had been deliberately hidden from official records for extended periods. As spring 2025 approached, the investigation had reached a point where most available leads had been exhausted. Torres continued to provide occasional additional details during follow-up interviews, but his information had become increasingly repetitive and unhelpful. Federal authorities were pursuing investigations in multiple states based on his revelations, but these efforts required extensive time and resources with no guarantee of success. The families faced a new phase of their long ordeal, having more information about their children's fate than ever before, but still lacking the definitive answers they sought. The discovery of the socks at Willowbrook had ultimately led to Torres's capture and the revelation of a complex criminal network, but Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell remained missing after nearly 24 years. Detective Santos, now nearing retirement, reflected on the case that had defined much of her career. While Torres's arrest and cooperation represented a significant law enforcement success, she understood that true closure for the families would only come with the recovery of their children or definitive proof of their fate. The investigation would continue, But Santos recognized that some questions might never be fully answered, even with the perpetrator in custody and cooperating. The broader implications of the case had already begun to influence law enforcement practices and missing children investigations. The discovery that physical evidence could remain viable for decades in certain conditions led to renewed efforts to re-examine cold cases using advanced forensic techniques. The multi-state trafficking network revealed by Torres's confessions prompted increased coordination between federal and local agencies in addressing organized crimes against children. For the community of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, the resolution of the mystery brought mixed emotions. Relief that the perpetrator had been caught was tempered by the realization that their neighbors and friends, the Brennan and Powell families, still faced uncertainty about their children's ultimate fate. The case had become part of the town's identity, and residents struggled with how to process the partial answers that had finally emerged after so many years of complete mystery. As the investigation continued into 2025, new developments occasionally emerged from the ongoing efforts to trace the trafficking network and locate other victims. Each discovery brought hope that Tommy and Marcus might yet be found, while also serving as a reminder of the complex and often heartbreaking realities of crimes against children. The 2 pairs of socks discovered at Willowbrook had opened a door to answers that the families had sought for more than 2 decades. But that door had revealed a corridor with many more questions and challenges ahead. The case of Tommy Brennan and Marcus Powell had evolved from a local tragedy into a national story that highlighted both the persistence required in cold case investigations and the ongoing challenges faced by families of missing children. Their story would continue to unfold as investigators followed every lead and pursued every possibility, driven by the hope that somewhere 2 men in their 30s might still remember their real names and find their way back to the families who never stopped looking for them.